Actually interesting that you talk, Drew, about what we just talked about with botanical balance. And I think I showed this graphic when we were doing botanical balance, pretty much to show what Neolife is all about, and that we're actually there to provide solutions to various global trends and how we do a good job about that, ending the trend of poor health and poverty. But interestingly, this same slide relates to the things we're going to talk about tonight, because we're talking about conditions of lifestyle. I know we end up talking about them as diseases, and of course sometimes they end up becoming diseases, but these are actually related to the lifestyle choices we make, the lifestyle options that we have sometimes to make our choices from. And I want to just show you yet again how all these conditions that we talk about, sometimes independently, are actually interrelated. So the product that we're going to talk about this evening is going to relate to these conditions as well. And I find that quite interesting, which means that we don't look at one product and say, or one component of our diet and say, this is the most important. They're all interlinked, which is very interesting. So the way we talk about lifestyle choices and these conditions is we often refer to different food groups, you know, the fruit and vegetables, we talk about whole grains, and then we're interested in finding out about the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. I mean, we're well known for those, like carotenoids, flavonoids, the cruciferous extracts. But what we have to realize also is in these food groups that we're talking about and talking about those particular nutrients, another very, very important component of our dietary requirements is also involved in those particular food groups. And that, of course, is fiber. And so that is why we've reintroduced, if you like, our all-natural fiber food and drink mix. And I think that name even, it tells you a little bit more about the product. This is actually now a global product. So we've brought in a product that we're using all around the world, which gives you an idea that it's the best we have on offer at the moment. But let's talk a bit more about fiber before we talk about the product specifically, because I think a lot of people tend to think of fiber as bran. You know, they say, well, I buy bran and I sprinkle it over my porridge in the morning, or I bring it in wherever I can, so I'm covered. Well, you know, there's a lot more to fiber than bran. In fact, fiber is not just one single entity. It's actually a whole complex of a whole lot of different dietary factors coming actually from a variety of different foods. So just buying one particular component is really not, covering the problem or the gap at all. So I suppose we could really call it an essential non-nutrient, which might sound a little crazy because we're always talking about nutrients getting into our cells and into the bloodstream. But the interesting thing about fiber is that, yes, it's in all the plant foods that we would eat, and the reason that it is there is that it's to provide structure and support to the cells in that plant. But in actual fact, to the human being, when we eat foods like the fruit and vegetables, all the whole grains, and we get all those lovely other nutrients that I talked about, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and the like, the fiber actually is not absorbed. The human body cannot actually break down and digest all that fibrous substance that is in the plant food to create support. We actually use it for a physical, functional component in our human health. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it comes from all different kinds of foods. It might be the pulp of a fruit, it might be the skin, it might be the pip, it could be nuts, it could be beans or legumes. So a whole variety of different foods we have to include in our diet so that we can actually get adequate amounts of fiber. But I think that what we need to realize, as I say, that there's a variety and they're not all equal. Not all fibers are equal. And for the purposes of trying to distinguish one group from another, there are other components to the fiber story, but this is usually the most common way that we look at them. And I want to just quickly go through this just to distinguish for you the different types and giving you an idea of how much variety of foods we need to eat in order to get them. So some of you are probably quite familiar with these terms, soluble fiber and insoluble. So what are they soluble in? Well, soluble in water. In other words, they mix with water. So it attracts water and it forms a sort of a gel. It gets a bit sticky. And we get that from the gums or pectins that we find in different foods. And a very well-known food or group of foods would be things like oats, for example, would be a very, very good form of this soluble fiber. Even beans and legumes would be also very good. So if we look at the other side where we say the insoluble fiber, well, so it doesn't really mix with water, it doesn't dissolve in water, it attracts water. So it's almost like a sponge. It sort of expands, so it creates bulk. And we usually get this kind of fiber from the very supportive cellulose, the things that give, as I say, the plant its actual structure, keeps it upright, for example. So those are the different groups, soluble and insoluble, soluble in water so that it mixes with it and becomes gelatinous, or it doesn't mix with it, but it attracts it and actually it swells into sort of like a big sponge. Now they have different functions as a result of those properties. So if we look again at the soluble one, the sort of sticky one, the gelatinous one, you'll see that because it's sticky, and now this is a natural thing, it's not something that's been creating artificially by using a product, for example. This is what happens with our foods if we eat them. So when they get a bit sticky, even at the level of the stomach, for example, the foods that we're eating and the nutrients that we're eating alongside that fiber will actually obviously be sort of enmeshed with that fiber. And so the nutrients will be released more slowly from that sort of mesh or that gelatinous substance. And that's a good thing because it keeps us fuller for longer. But if we just think about what we just talked about the other day with botanical balance and wanting to regulate blood sugar levels, for example, because that stickiness is there, the actual foods are released from that stickiness into the bloodstream. They get digested and absorbed in a more moderate and a slower fashion, and a more sensible fashion for the body, if you like. So even though there's maybe a lot of glucose available to the body, it will only be released slowly. So it gets into the bloodstream, and then it requests just a small amount of insulin in a moderate, regulated way. And that way we regulate blood sugar as well by enabling ourselves to have enough soluble fiber in our diet. Plus, of course, that sense of fullness is there also, so it satisfies us for longer. But I'll talk a little bit more in detail about these different things, blood cholesterol, for example, just now. So that's the one group where the soluble fiber dissolves in the water, becomes gelatinous, and adds its influence to the way we digest foods and the way we feel and how our bodies respond. And as I say, the insoluble one, which swells up a bit like a big sponge, obviously creates bulk. And that, if some people will call that nature's broom, it actually, because it's bulky, it sweeps through our digestive system. Now remember, we're not talking about going into the bloodstream here. We haven't got inside the body. We're actually in the digestive tract at this point, in our piping, as I like to call it. And that's where this is going to stay. So we're going to influence our health literally from the outside of our bloodstream, from the outside of our cells, even for that matter at this point. So this broom effect, or this, because it's bulky, it actually sort of sweeps anything in front of it down through the piping right to the end where we want to actually eliminate, because that's the sixth stage of digestion, is elimination. And this is where fiber does play a big part, and an important one. So two different types of functions, if you like, both happening in the piping and gotten from different food sources, so that we have to eat a variety of fruit and vegetables, as you can see, legumes, beans, and also, of course, whole grain substances. Things that haven't been polished and processed, so brown rice, wild rice, whole wheat, bread and substances, vegetables with their peels, for example. All of that is going to contribute to our fiber intake. So let's look at those individual things and see why fiber is actually important in our diet. And I'm just going to go through a few of them very quickly, just to give you a sense of how important this is. So promoting regularity, well, that's of course in the digestive tract, regularity of elimination. That's what the sixth stage of nutrition is, that we need to get rid of whatever the body doesn't need now. After all the processes have happened in the body, there are things the body now wants to eliminate, literally get out of the body. So we want to promote that on a regular, consistent basis. Otherwise, it in turn has problems if we can't get rid of the waste. Also, fiber, interestingly, will support the health of the colon. Now, the colon and the large intestine are exactly the same thing, so the words are used interchangeably. So it can actually support the health of the large intestine, which is where elimination will eventually take place. It promotes heart health, and we'll talk about that. Helps regulate blood sugar, which I referred to a little bit. And again, controls our weight, because it controls our sense of satisfaction of how much we've eaten. how we're feeling, how our brain reacts to what it is we have in our stomach and our intestine. And you'll see there, look at heart health, blood sugar, and weight. Those were those 3 circles that I showed you that we talked about relating to a completely different product just the other day. But in fact, fiber still plays a part in those very, very same conditions, which are our lifestyle conditions that eventually, if left unattended or not properly nourished and we don't make the right choices, will influence our disease patterns. So a high fiber diet definitely helps to keep us healthy. All right, so very briefly, let's look at the different benefits of the gastrointestinal, that's the gut, the intestine and the stomach, and how the health is influenced by the fact that we do or don't have fiber in adequate amounts in our diet. So common problems, flatulence, bloating, constipation, that means we can't eliminate effectively, diverticulitis, and hemorrhoids. Now, some of these things I probably talk about in a bit too much detail to make some of you comfortable, but you know what, we're all human, and these are conditions that everyone experiences at some point, and a lot of people don't choose to talk about them, but in fact, it has a very detrimental effect on our health if we don't get to that 6th stage of nutrition by doing elimination effectively. So fiber plays a very important part here because it keeps us regular, which means it enables us to eliminate. Now, let me just talk a little bit about constipation, diverticulitis, and the like. I talked about this fiber that swells, and it's like a broom, and it swells and fills with that water. And what it actually does is it touches the sides of our digestive tract, of the piping of our colon, for example. And there are muscles there, and when those muscles get sort of attached, they sort of twitch and they move. They actually pulsate, a bit like when you're swallowing. You think about the process of swallowing. It's actually more than just a one-part thing. It's sort of things move down. You're kind of aware of it as you go down your throat. That's called peristalsis. That's muscular activity. Well, it's exactly what happens at the other end of our digestive tract. When we touch those muscles, they move and they push whatever is in the piping further down. That's what they're supposed to do. So they enable us to eliminate. We get something called diverticulitis or diverticulosis because, in fact, we don't have enough bulk. So in order for us to get rid of the waste, there's often a lot of straining that happens, and it actually damages or weakens the walls of our colon. The ones that are actually, if we stimulated the muscles, would simply move it along by itself, but if we haven't got enough bulk, then our body tries to move it along without the assistance of those muscles. And the straining of that activity eventually weakens the lining, and we get little pouches that happen on the sides of our colon, for example. And many, many people have them, and those are called diverticular. Now, the condition will then be called diverticulosis, but if they get inflamed or irritated, then you get the itis bit, which is the inflammation, and you get diverticulitis. So those little pouches are quite common. Many, many people have them, but they may never concern them at all because maybe their system works and the broom gets things cleaned and out everything goes. But sometimes they do get inflamed because we perhaps don't clear them out properly, and then any little scratchy thing, it might be a seed or a nut or whatever, comes and scratches it. That's really, really sore. So we can change that itis bit, the inflammation bit, from the foods that we eat. If we actually have enough fluid and we have enough bulk in our intestine all the time, we will simply move the waste and move the substances further down the digestive tract without actually irritating those little diverticular. And of course, hemorrhoids, again, people don't talk about them very easily, but lots and lots of people have that issue. And that's also just from the fact that we are perhaps constipated and we're pushing and straining. And it's a bit like a varicose vein, really, just a different part of the body. So those are all related to the fact that we don't have enough bulk in our intestine at the time, that we're trying to simply move natural waste through the piping and out the other end. So the fiber keeps us regular because it enables that bowel movement to happen. It reduces the pressure that I was talking about and the discomfort that comes with it. And interestingly, this fiber, we've been talking a lot about different bacteria and how important they are. We talk about probiotics. We've got a product called Acidophilus Plus, which literally delivers bacteria to our colon, for example. And now these bacteria have many, many benefits. And one of the things that they do is that they ferment the fiber that we have in our colon. They're meant to do that. And when they ferment that fiber, provided it's present, they actually produce other substances as a result of this process, which are very beneficial to the body. They're very beneficial to the colon itself, but also to other aspects and other parts of the body. The thing that they benefit the colon with is when they're fermenting this fiber, they create substances that give energy to the cells of the colon, for example. So that enables them to do their work properly. It also makes sure that those cells are very tightly packed so that we don't have little gaps in those cells, that things that are supposed to be now waste and getting out the body are actually getting back into the body. So very important that this substance called fiber, which is really, as I say, a non-nutrient, and we tend to dismiss or just talk about it as bran, is actually a very, very important component of so many aspects of our well-being. And those little bacteria, they also need the fiber as well. So that's what's happening in our gastrointestinal tract in terms of actual elimination. We talked about heart health and common problems with heart health, of course, stroke, high blood pressure. But the thing here that we're interested in is cholesterol. And without getting too complicated, but it's usually the soluble one, the sort of slightly sticky one, that enables us to actually remove some of the substances they're called bile acids. And I'm only mentioning them because the body actually needs them, and usually the body recycles them, it reabsorbs them. But when there's fiber around, it actually takes these bile acids and it eliminates them along with the waste. But they're not lost to the body, because what the body says is, okay, I still need these bile acids, but because I didn't get them at that level, I didn't reabsorb them, I'm simply going to use my levels of cholesterol that I have in my blood and manufacture them. So the fiber actually gets them out the body. The body really wants them, and it would have recycled them if the fiber hadn't been there. But that's not a problem. We've got cholesterol in our blood. Remember, we manufacture much more cholesterol than we ever eat. And sometimes that's just simply a problem in people's bodies. So we now use our cholesterol to make these bile acids. So that's the way we keep balance. We utilize cholesterol, make the bile acids, and the cycle continues. And fiber enables us to regulate our blood levels of cholesterol in that way. Again, we talked about this glycemic response and regulating our blood sugar, and we talked the other day about the fact that we don't know that we necessarily have diabetes. There's a whole process that happens before we get there. We can become insulin resistant, we get pre-diabetic. In other words, our blood glucose levels can be out of balance, simply because we're making such strong demands on our mechanisms in our body, of our biochemistry. If we could all just slow that down and regulate it, as I said, in a moderate sort of way, we wouldn't be making our pancreas tired, and we wouldn't be upsetting the balance in our bodies. So this is exactly where fiber can play a part. Because as I say, it becomes slightly gelatinous, even at the level of the stomach. The foods that we are eating are slowed down. The actual emptying of the stomach and the actual release of those foods and the glucose into the bloodstream is actually slowed and regulated. So the demand for insulin is slow and regulated. So we don't have any panic in the body. And that way we keep our sugar levels a lot more balanced and the whole process a lot more moderate, simply by eating the right amount of fiber on a regular basis. And then, of course, as you saw with one of those other circles, interconnected with the health of our sugar levels, the health of our heart. Of course, a common denominator here is that many of us are overweight, and that comes with its own problems. And for various reasons, people are overweight. But the benefit of fiber is that it promotes this bulking effect. It slows down the release of food, so we feel fuller for longer. We're actually more satisfied for longer. The signals that come from our gut to our brain and back again are, very well controlled. The brain is saying, gee, you sound like, if you've got enough food, there's no panic here. And so you don't have the appetite that you normally would have. And your sugar levels as well are not going up and down, creating hunger as well. So it encourages the body to burn fat as a source of energy. And also typically fiber-rich foods, if you think of fruit and vegetables, they're not very high in calories or kilojoules. So they are beneficial to you in your health, but they're also not adding a whole lot of energy that you're not going to use, that adds to our weight gain. So something, as I say, as simple as fiber is adding to all the other components and all the other products that we have, that we are trying to influence these diseases of lifestyle and end the trend of poor health in our lifestyle choices. So let's just look about how much fiber we actually need, because this is quite important to understand the relationship of what you're actually eating and the numbers, because sometimes the numbers don't sound that very impressive. But we're required to have, it's considered that we should have somewhere between 25 to 35 grams, male and female, depending, women more, a little bit less, men a bit more. But that looks like a small number, but it's actually not that easy to achieve. And, just to be a bit dramatic, if you had to get 25 grams, you'd have to eat those 20 bananas or 10 slices of bread or 20 cups of maize meal porridge to be able to achieve 25 grams. But if we were simply just looking at ordinary everyday food that we eat, and even when you're trying really hard, maybe you're having 3 or 4 vegetables, perhaps you're having 2 slices of whole wheat bread or maybe some brown rice, you're having even some legumes and a bit of fruit, perhaps 2 portions of fruit. Even when I add all that up, it probably only comes to about 19 or 20 grams of fiber, even though it's a pretty good menu for the day. So actually it's not that easy to achieve even the 25 grams that we're required to do. You've really got a plan. And as I constantly say, and the more I realize how important supplementation is because we can do it on a daily basis, because these recommendations are for us to do on a daily basis. And so, as I've said before, many of us will say, oh, well, I eat fruit or I eat, whole grains and what have you, but we don't do that in the right amounts every day of the week. And that's where the gaps start to increase. So having some supplementation that can just fill that gap for you, just make sure that you are complying with all the dietary recommendations that are considered to make us healthier and happier along the way. So let's look then at what we've introduced. So it's a concentrated fiber form in a powder, very, very finely textured powder from 12 different food sources. So it's not just about a little bit of bran, it's 12 different food sources that we've gone to. And each serving will provide you with 8 grams. So now when that number, while it looks small, is actually 1/3 of what's required for your daily intake. So just in one scoop, because that's all it requires, is you will actually get 8 grams of fiber. And there you'll see we've done the split. So we've got the soluble and we've got the insoluble. The soluble is 2 grams, 2.5 grams. That's when it starts to have an influence on people's health. So here we're adding it in, and you're obviously going to eat other foods in the day. So you're going to get a really good spread if you're making an effort to eat properly and you're making sure that you cover all the bases. This 8 grams with a split of 2 soluble and 6 insoluble is a huge benefit to the way our body is going to work. What we've also done in this product is we've added a little bit more protein from whey, which adds a little bit of quality protein. Not that this is a protein-rich product by any means, but the whey protein also adds more flavor to this product. And so it actually has a very pleasant taste. It's not a very strong taste, but it's very pleasant. And we've added a little bit of fructose. Remember, fructose is a natural fruit sugar. And that we've just added there again for a little bit of flavor. So we've enhanced this product. And so you'll see that it's an all-natural fiber product, but it's a food and drink mix. So you can actually even have it on its own. So a balance of soluble and insoluble fibers, as I pointed out, from the natural whole food sources, 12 different sources. And you can mix this with your favorite beverage or food. So you could mix it, for example, with your shake. You just add 1 scoop and you're getting an additional 8 grams. And if you're having the shake and then you're having this fiber, you're actually getting 13 grams of fiber in one meal. And when you've heard about all the things that fiber does, that is a huge benefit to our health. But it's also, you can actually add it also, of course, to baking. You can actually substitute some of the flour and you use the fiber blend here that you've got, these all natural fiber, and you can actually mix this with your baking and any other foods or sauces or whatever casseroles that you're making. But it's also a standalone product. It's not gritty, it's not granular, it's very, very finely textured. And when you mix, you can mix it just with water. It's quite pleasant, but certainly mixing it with even milk or a fruit juice, as I say, it doesn't give you that gritty sensation. It's very, very smooth and actually quite silky. It's actually very nice. And of course, as we always attempt to do, we don't put anything artificial in there, no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, sweeteners or preservatives. We haven't added any sodium. And of course, it's also gluten-free. And I think that's very important because a lot of people who eat a gluten-free diet or choose to, not even that they have any disease issues, often steer clear of all grains and a lot of carbohydrates. And their fiber content is very, very low in their diet as a result. The fact that because a lot of people don't realize where gluten is found. It's not in every single carbohydrate in every single grain, but they tend to eliminate that mainly out of ignorance. And so their fiber intake, as I say, is very, very small. And so therefore their probiotic activity is poor. Sometimes their elimination is poor. So here you have a product that gives you all this fiber. They can still, if they choose to, eliminate some of the foods that they prefer not to eat, but they're getting a gluten-free substitute with all natural fiber food and drink mix. So we're very excited about the fact that this is in our market now. As I say, it's now our global formulation. And I think I hope I've shown you how very important fiber is to all of us in our diet, and not that easy to achieve the required amount on a daily basis. So while we're looking at many other components of our intake and vitamins and minerals, as I say, and phytonutrients, let's not forget that amongst that mix, fiber should be right there with all the rest of them. So easy to use, easy to mix, tastes delicious, and I hope you're going to enjoy using it because we're all very proud of all natural fiber food and drink mix. And we'd like to hear from you, in fact, on all the varieties of things that you're going to try to use it and how you're going to make things and how your baking is going to taste, and certainly how your body is going to work a lot more efficiently for you. So that's what I have to share. Thanks, Drew.